All your data's out there, and you have no idea if any of it's valid. You're just propagating single-bit errors into all of your backups ad infinitum. You don't worry about that? You don't think about that? How terrible
John,
it is?
I choose not to worry about that.
Wow. Blame me when your wedding pictures are corrupted and there's a giant pink pixel where your face should be.
Please. Well, firstly, a pink pixel where my face should be would probably be an improvement. But secondly, I have like 35 backups of that, including the original.
Yeah, they're
DVDs.
all corrupted because once they go bad on the original disc, you're just corrupting your backups. You're just propagating the corruption because you have no idea it's there.
I have the original DVD.
The original DVDs, those will keep, yep. Mm-hmm.
Oh, gosh.
Little burnt spots on ink under plastic. That'll last forever.
And it's organic dye, so it decomposes.
Yep.
I hate you so much. So what are we talking about today? Well, this is turning into the Accidental Marco podcast because you've gone and sold stuff again. I'm waiting to be told that I've been replaced or sold or, I don't know, somebody else is my daddy now. So a big week.
Yeah, a little bit. At least this is the last one. Like, I'm out of stuff to sell now.
Mm-hmm, right, yeah. Well, you just got to make new things to sell.
Yeah, seriously. I saw so many jokes about how your next app has already been sold and nobody even knows what it is yet.
Yeah, that's pretty good because I don't know what it is yet. So that's pretty good. Actually, at this point, I do know what it is, but we'll see. If you just pay attention to what sessions I go to during WWDC, you'll probably be able to guess it pretty easily, but it doesn't really matter. I'm really excited to finally have, like, basically, I mentioned at some point before the magazine sale was public, and I should mention too, like, Glenn and I were arranging this almost a month ago, and it just so happened that, you know, we did arrange it after the Instapaper thing, but it was before the Tumblr thing, and as the Tumblr thing was going on, Glenn and I were emailing each other going, man, this is going to be hilarious when we announce this, and everyone's going to think I'm just selling everything I own. But yeah, the main reasons I wanted to sell the magazine were, you know, what I wrote in the blog post, which is basically I had created a job for myself that was a lot less of what I wanted to do than I expected. Like, it was a lot of just administrative stuff and process stuff and overhead and almost no development.
You know, I kind of wish that I failed as spectacularly as you do in creating these lucrative appearing businesses that you just have to be burdened with unloading. It's a tough life you live, Marco.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, no, it's you know, the other main reason that I wanted to sell it is that because it was taking up my time, and it's a mental burden as well, having these things. You know, like everything that you do, you know, occupies some kind of space in your mind and in your, you know, when you, like, in your present state of mind. I'm probably abusing these terms. I'm definitely not a Buddhist or anything that anyone who would be trained properly in being able to describe these things, but I don't like having things on my plate that I'm not really into. And obviously, there's some stuff that you got to do. You just got to do it. Like, you know, you got to do your taxes. You got to, you know, clean your house and stuff. You know, like, there's stuff you got to do. But something like making your own business, you know, you have control over that. So anyway, one of the reasons why I wanted to sell Instapaper was because it was, like, weighing on me mentally that I didn't want to put in the effort into it that it really deserved, and a lot of it I couldn't put in the effort that it really deserved. With the magazine, it was more like, I can keep doing this indefinitely because it wasn't taking up much of my time, but why keep a business around that I'm barely putting anything into? And what I learned also, like, coding...
You know the answer to that question, though, right?
Well, because it makes money, right? Is that the answer?
Yes, that's the usual answer. Like,
well,
why keep a business around that makes money that I barely put anything into? Yeah, that's the answer.
Well, but the reality is, like, you know, you can ask like people who buy a restaurant, you know, thinking, oh, this will generate money forever. Like, you know, maybe, but you're going to be involved whether you like it or not. Like, it's going to need you. You know, like, it's the idea of a business that just generates passive money and you never have to touch it. Those do exist, but not really in the software world. They really don't exist. You can neglect something for a while and it can work for a little while. But it doesn't really exist in the sense that, you're still going to have to maintain that. You're still going to be responsible for that. It doesn't. You can't just let it sit there and stagnate forever. Eventually things are going to dwindle down. People are going to see that you haven't done much to it in a while, and they're going to move on. Or something's going to break. With like the TextMate 1 problem, something might break at any point and cause problems. So,
well, there's no reason you couldn't have done exactly what Glenn is doing, though, which is like, so he's taking the reins now, and he's not a developer, right? Well, not this kind of developer. So he is just really bringing people on to take over development of the iOS app to do all sorts of ancillary things while he sort of wrangles them. So it seems to me that it's like, if your heart was in it, if this is what you really wanted to be, was like run a publication and grow a publication, you would be doing it. And it has less to do with whether the thing is making lots of money or a little bit of money or how long it's going to make money, because you're perfectly capable of doing the things that Glenn is doing with it, basically delegating to other people to do all the stuff, delegating the development and everything. It's just that seems like not something you want to do.
That's right. And I could delegate the development to somebody else, but the development was like the part I liked the most. But there just wasn't that much that I wanted to do with it. Like, I loved building the app. I loved all the little design tricks and everything, and I loved doing all that. But then once the app is done, I'm like, well, it's in maintenance mode basically, and you can. There's certainly features you can add. There's some good stuff Glenn wants to do to it, but it was all stuff that I really didn't care that much about. I wasn't that motivated to do, and ultimately it wasn't. You're right that if I wanted to keep doing this, I could have. There's nothing, of course I could have. My theory is that, well, I know, just the way I feel, I know that that I'm not really, I'm just not that into doing the management and the business stuff. I do that stuff because I have to, not because I really love it. And so the magazine had become, my role in the magazine had become pretty much all business stuff and overhead, and none of the stuff I wanted to do very often. And so what I also learned, I was talking to our friend _David Smith recently, like a couple hours ago. And because, David Smith has lots of apps. He has a portfolio of many apps. He does a lot of things. I don't think I can really do that. When I started working on the magazine alongside Instapaper, I started learning some of these difficulties in my motivation or my personality or whatever it is. I'm not very good at working on multiple apps at the same time of the same type. I can do a web app and a native app. That those are different enough. I can do an app, a podcast, and a blog because those are very different things, and they serve different parts of my brain and my satisfaction and what I do and what I make. But I really don't think I'm very good at having multiple apps that all need attention.
Well, it's kind of the same
when I
reason.
had the nursing clock app, that was nothing. You can I crapped that out in a couple of days, and and it didn't require any maintenance, and it made something like $30 over the course of its life. But it didn't require any maintenance. So that that's a whole other story. But to have like two apps going at the same time that both need a good amount of attention, ongoing, I can't do that. I really don't work well that way. So I really I wanted to I want to start this new thing I'm doing, and it's an iOS app. So I wanted to start a new thing, and I know I could have kept doing the magazine, but I was so not that into it already, just because of what my job had become that I created for myself. I was so not that into it already that I wanted a clean plate. I wanted to have nothing else competing for my attention in the app space. Also, I mentioned last episode or recently, I don't know when. I don't want to talk this whole episode, by the way, but I mentioned I mentioned last episode or something like that I work in bursts of productivity. Running a publication doesn't really allow you to do that because there's a publication schedule. So every 2 weeks, even though it wasn't a lot of work for me, Glenn was doing almost all of it already, but every 2 weeks I had to do XYZ. And doing a podcast, and that's a little bit different in that it's easier and it's more of me being creative and having this creative output. publishing an issue of the magazine did not involve creativity on my part by very much. I picked a few photos and picked the cover image, and that's about it. And then I had to pay checks to everybody and do the server push and stuff like that. And it just wasn't. It wasn't that interesting. So like having to do that every 2 weeks felt like a restriction on me. Whereas, and you can't really take a week off. Like at least this show, if we really want to, we could take a week off. Not that any of us are likely to do that, but if we really wanted to, we could take a week off. With a publication, you can't. So it was like it locked me into this fixed schedule, but I don't really work very well that way. So that was another reason. But anyway, the main reason I wanted to sell it was because I wanted to clear my plate and be able to put myself into my next project fully.
And that makes complete sense. And not to psychoanalyze you at all, but it seems to me that we're seeing a trend, and certainly I've known you for a really darn long time, so I feel like I'm somewhat qualified to speak about this. It seems like I'm seeing a trend that anything that's compulsory, you tend to not like. And in the case of the magazine, once
you don't say.
Yeah,
it's been a trend
right?
since like first grade.
Yeah. So I mean, that's exactly my point. I mean, you've talked a lot about how you don't really like homework. You've talked about how you don't really love paying taxes, which, granted, who does? You've talked,
I love paying taxes. I don't like dealing with it.
Well, you know what I mean. So. And also, it seems like part of the reason that you got turned off by the magazine, to build on what you were saying before, is because you had to be productive at certain times. It's not that you hated necessarily doing the work, at least that's what it sounds to me anyway, that it's not necessarily that you hated doing the work as much as you had to do it at a certain time, and that's really tough. And the other thing I'll say, and then you can refute everything I just told you if you want, because I'm trying to put words in your mouth. The other thing I'll say is it's like the same reason you don't have the 1M anymore. You've got your fancy, nice car. You don't want to have to choose between two equally fancy, nice cars.
It's so ridiculously good.
I know. And you're going to get me started, and we don't want to do that because nobody listened to me.
Yeah, move on.
But you know what I mean? You don't want to have to choose between two nice things any more than you want to have to choose between two crummy things, or whatever the case may be. And whether or not other people will understand what the burden was, the fact of the matter is you felt it was a burden, and you felt that you had to work on it rather than desired to. And so that's the point at which, at least to me, it seems that's the point at which you sold Instapaper, when you felt like you had to work on it. It's the point in which you sold the magazine as well, when you felt like you had to work on it and when you didn't want to work on it anymore. I mean, from an outsider's point of view, that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. I mean, I'm not a very complicated personality. There's not a lot of layers here. It's pretty much what you see is what you get. Like, I don't make any effort to hide all that stuff, and you nailed it. That's me.
I mean, that's pretty fair. John, any observations on that before we totally sidestep?
No, I don't think so. I think Marco is doing what we would all do if we could. Not do the things you don't want to do the things you do want to do, right?
Yeah.
All right. Do you want to share anything about this forthcoming app? And I did not figure out in advance whether or not I should ask that question. So
not yet. I will in time. Honestly, I'm still debating in my head, because debating out loud is boring. I'm still debating in my head whether to pre-announce anything about the app before it's ready, whether to put up like a splash page and do all that bullshit. Oops, I gotta bleep that. Or all the stuff people do. Just hype up their app, have a queue. I'm not gonna do that, but put up a splash page and tease it, say coming soon. Ooh. I don't know if I want to do that, or if I want to just say what the app will be and then collect feedback at the expense of having competitors then copy me and stuff. So I don't know. I'm going to decide all those things over the next few months. But what I have decided is that I'm not going to make any major decisions about the app's feature set or design or layout or navigational structure until after WWDC, because I want to see what iOS 7 introduces. I want to see what's different and what's coming up. And then I will decide fully, like, here's the kind of feature set this will have. Here's the business model. Like, if they introduce something like upgrade pricing or trials, that might influence my decision on the business model. So I don't want to make any decisions yet on all those big things. And then I'll see. Maybe throughout the summer, maybe I'll tease it. Maybe I will just announce it outright, and it won't be available yet. Or maybe I'll just shut up about it until it's ready. I don't know yet.
Well, did you see what Justin Williams is doing with whatever he's building?
I didn't have a chance to look at that yet.
Is
Yeah,
that
the passbook
passbook
thing.
thing?
Yeah, I forget what he's calling it. Man, this is an accidental podcast.
Pit
I don't know
Pass.
any sort. Yes,
It's a
Pit
car
Pass, that's
reference,
right.
Casey. We should know this.
I know. I'm disappointed myself. But the premise, in case you're not familiar, is you get this passbook item into Passbook, and I guess what he's doing is he's going to update it with little bits and blurbs about the forthcoming app as he decides to release it. And whether or not you believe in pre-releasing things and pre-announcing things, I think it's a very clever and different take on something that we've seen ad nauseum our entire lives. So I didn't know, Marco, if you had any thoughts on that. I guess if you haven't really looked into it,
I haven't
you
had a
wouldn't,
chance to look at it, but it looks like the point of it is to do things. It looks like a combination of being able to tease apps that are upcoming and also like the iOS version of a newsletter.
Yeah.
Traditional software developers, especially indies who have like sold on the Mac and stuff, they have for a long time had like mailing lists they maintain, and then like Rogue Amoeba has talked about this before, our friends over there, where like they hardly ever mail anything out to people, but when they make a brand new product or a major update, then they will. And that's always like a significant source of upgrade revenue and of customers coming back and buying new stuff, and people actually like that. And on iOS, there's no good way to do it. You can you aren't allowed to do it with push notifications, although people do, but you aren't allowed to technically, and you don't want to annoy people, and you also don't usually have access to things like their email address. So this is an interesting idea if it's going to address some of that beyond just the promoting upcoming app thing, but. I guess that's all I have to say on it because I don't know much about it yet.
Yeah. John, did you have any thoughts?
Marco was saying he wasn't sure whether he wanted to tease this thing ahead of time. It seems pretty clear to me that you don't want to tease it ahead of time, but are only considering it because it may be a good way to build good buzz for your application, right?
Well, here's the thing. I've always thought building buzz before you could actually get it is kind of a waste, because I know when. Like I forget where I was talking to somebody about this. Sorry to whoever that was. Hopefully it wasn't you guys. That there's this movie it's a documentary about sign painters. People used to paint signs by hand before like vinyl signs and everything came out, and they keep promoting this thing everywhere, and I see it everywhere. And it's a little documentary. It's been at like film festivals and stuff, but I can't get it. I can't buy it. I can't rent it. I can't view it online. I can't. No matter what I do, I won't be able to get it for months. And so they're getting all this publicity out there, and I'm interested. I'm responding. I'm saying I want to see this movie. I will pay a few bucks right now to see this movie if you can get it to me, but it's not out. And like that drives me crazy as a customer. Like, because what's probably going to happen is it's going to come out in 6 months, and I won't care anymore, and I will have forgotten by then. So I hate pre-hyping things because you get people all interested. I mean, this is one of the reasons why the Apple strategy works so well. Apple says nothing until the thing's available, and then it's like, all right, here's this awesome new thing. You want this, right? You can buy it today or this Friday. You can respond immediately. The hype does something for you. When this product's not even available yet and not going to be available for months, what can you really do with that? What can you really do with all that hype? Like, to me, I think it's kind of arrogant to expect people to remember all that crap in 2 or 3 months.
Well, you would. I mean, I assume you wouldn't do like this. It's a spectrum here. You wouldn't tease it way ahead of time. But perhaps like basically first, you don't put anything up until the thing is basically done, and all you're doing is delaying it so you can build this hype. So maybe if it's only like 1 week or 2 weeks lead time, when you are actually finished, basically, and you're just like, this is the ramp up to sale. Like I wouldn't say like do like they do with the movies and tease it the summer before it comes out with some obscure image to get people excited about what the movie is, and then but what I was getting at before is that if marketing was not a factor at all and human beings weren't buying this application and you were just making it for your own edification, you would release it when it's done and not say anything about it ahead of time. I mean, you won't even say what it is at this point. Right, so it seems like your inclination is why would I ever tell anyone anything until it's done, and then I would give it to you, and here it is. But the only reason you're considering it is because maybe that attitude is a little bit too close to the vest. Maybe there's something that's a happy medium where 3 days before I have a countdown clock, or a week ahead of time I put an image, or something like that. You know what I mean? I
mean, you have to look at it as for me, like what's in it for me, really? Like what is my benefit from pre-announcing and pre-teasing something? And because, and it's hard, honestly. I would love to share stuff with people. I would love to share information with people. I've been burned a lot in the past by being ripped off, and I'm still very sensitive to that. I'm trying to reduce my sensitivity to that over time, but I still am very sensitive to it. And so the last thing I want to do is announce what I'm going to do and then get ripped off before I even do it.
Everything's a remix, Marco.
Well, the one thing I would say, and then maybe we can do a quick sponsor. The one thing I would say is that, in my personal opinion, you've just pre-announced everything you should need to pre-announce, or need is probably a poor choice of words, but everything you might want to pre-announce. We know that you're working on an iOS app. We know that it's going to be something different, and I don't think we really need to know any more than that. And I think I echo what you were saying earlier, that it's almost disrespectful to say more than that. I mean, people know you've cleaned your plate of all your obligations. Presumably, you've found something that's no longer compulsory, but actually interesting to work on. And so everyone knows that you're not going to sit on your island with your yachts and helicopters and your M5 and drive in circles. So, and that's all I think anyone wants to know, is that we're going to get something else in the world thanks to you.
I can tell you that it will contain a UI web view, and it is not a watch.
Fair enough. So who do we like?
This week, we have two brand new sponsors. I'll tell you about the first one right now. The first one is from REM Object Software. It's called Oxygen for Cocoa. And it's a new programming language, and it's for Cocoa and the Objective-C runtime. So I want to explain this properly, so give me some leeway here. Basically, so they say, especially they even address this comment to John, it is not a bridge, and it is not an abstraction layer. It is a true language for the platform, and it replaces Objective-C within the tool stack. So it gives you full and direct access to all the Cocoa classes and APIs. All the objects you interact with in the code are the real Objective-C objects. You're calling methods on a real UI button, you're implementing a real UI table view controller subclass, etc. And it compiles down to regular Objective-C runtime objects and native code. So the resulting executable is all but indistinguishable from one created with Objective-C and Xcode. And if you debug the app, or if you run it in instruments, it looks like it's written in Objective-C, so all those things just work. So the language is based on Object Pascal. But there's a good reason that their tagline is, it's not your daddy's Pascal. I don't know, my daddy didn't have Pascal, maybe yours did. Because it goes well beyond what most people associate with Pascal, but it maintains all the readability and consistency that makes Pascal a great language. So it has many advanced features that they say blows Objective-C out of the water. Things like future types, class contracts, and many elements that make it just more convenient and straightforward to use in Objective-C. For instance, you can use plus to concatenate two NS strings, and it will automatically box from an integer to an NS number if you call a method on it, stuff like that. So, and the other cool thing about this is that this Oxygen language is also available for the .NET platform and for Java and Android. So if you are writing applications for multiple platforms, or say a server backend, you can do it all in the same language. Oxygen has been around on .NET for about 8 years, and it's the most widely used non-Microsoft language on the platform. So, what they say is, it isn't to encourage the write once, run everywhere kind of crappy cross-platform apps, but it's designed to let you create platforms or create apps for each platform natively, but you can use the same language in all places. So, you learn it once and you know it. Anyway, you can find out more at remobjects.com. That's REM objects.com/oxygen, but it's oxygen spelled with an E on the end. So it looks like oxygen, but it's pronounced oxygen. So OXYGENE. Or you can go to oxygenlanguage.com, spelled the same way. Listeners of this show can get 20% off any of the product with coupon code ATP13. Once again, that's remobjects.com/oxygen with an E on the end. And use coupon code ATP13 for 20% off. Thank you very much to Oxygen for Cocoa from REM Object Software. I was pronouncing this Oxygen in my head the entire time we were setting up the sponsorship until they gave me the text, and they specifically gave me the pronunciation guide that it is pronounced Oxygen.
Yeah, people have been sending me the links, and I was going to the site and reading the site and also pronouncing it the wrong way into my head.
Yeah, so it is pronounced Oxygen, but spelled Oxygen. All right.
Yeah, the top thing on their site should have been just a pronunciation guide.
Yeah.
Is there anyone behind this that we would know? Because I always wonder where these companies come from. Because what they're doing is not It's not something you're like, oh, I just think I'll do this thing where you write in one language and deploy on all these different platforms.
Yeah,
like,
it isn't a small job.
Right, and yet, like, you know, they seem like, where do these people come from? Where they must have been toiling on this in obscurity for like years.
Well, they
like,
said they've been on Microsoft platforms for 8 years, so I think that's probably where they came from. They started out there, and then
they were just off our
migrated
radar,
the language.
I guess.
Yeah,
they were just, and now they've branched out into iOS. That makes some sense because I'm like, how in the world do you ever, accomplish that in any reasonable time frame? You know.
I have no idea. And more importantly, you look at this, and you're like, why can't Apple do stuff like this? But they're not.
They can. They just, aren't.
Well, they don't care about anyone but themselves, and they themselves
and paying
are happy.
taxes. Let's have a whole podcast about paying taxes. That sounds like fun.
Oh, that sounds super fun.
Oh, God.
And sort of kind of speaking of paying taxes, the other thing I wanted to at least briefly talk about is Tim Cook at All Things D, which was last night, I believe, at the time of recording, which is Tuesday night. So there were a couple of interesting things that came of this, and to be honest, this conversation may be fairly short, but one of the things that I thought was really awesome was the way he talked about how Apple views their job. Tim said,
"We think that the customer pays us to make certain choices on their behalf. Instead of going in and I've seen some settings on these phones so that you're deep into the bowels of the thing, choosing this and that and the other and the other and the other. I don't think that's what most customers want. Do some want it? Yes, of course. But is that a mainstream customer want? I don't think so.
I thought that was about as good a way as any that I've ever heard somebody sum up the way Apple approaches products. And I know when I talk to a lot of my developer friends, particularly the local ones that work, say, in .NET or other languages, they all get very angry about the fact that they don't have a lot of control over iOS devices, and that's why a lot of them use Android devices. And I keep coming back to, 5-10 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I would have much preferred an Android device because I could fiddle with it and tweak it and turn it into something honestly kind of awful. But now I just want stuff to work, and I want Apple to make those choices for me. And again, I thought this was just an unbelievably good and short way of summing it up. I don't know what you guys thought about it.
I always get nervous when I hear Tim Cook saying product-related things. Not that I think he shouldn't. He's the CEO. He says, he speaks for the company. That's fine and everything, but I guess my picture of him in my head is not that, that's not his strength. I would much rather see him when he starts talking about a similar thing of why they don't have a large line of phones and all the different things about international business and manufacturing. I'm confident that he's an expert in those areas, but in these other areas, I feel like he is doing what a lot of other normal CEOs do, which is relaying the result of discussions with the lower level experts in the company who are at the tier below him or the tier below them. I don't know, it does sound right. Apple is, it sounds like a summary to me of previous discussions. And if you left it to Tim Cook, what things would be allowed to be in settings and what things wouldn't be, I feel like he would make bad decisions in one direction or another. And, either he would have very few settings, but they would be the wrong settings, or he'd have no settings, and that's untenable. Just ask Marco. Or he would have, too many settings, and not the whole settings thing. Could be a whole separate topic. The reason we talk about it is because it's not easy. You can't just give a rule you should have no settings, or you should have as few settings as possible. You have to have just the exact right settings, and you have to know, and it's kind of like a gut feeling or whatever, what are the right settings to have, what is important, what isn't, because we all know that the settings in an application can make or break it, right? It doesn't mean you have to have a lot of them, but if you don't know what you're doing, then you end up with a lot of them, and it's at least everyone who needs to change something can change the thing they want to change, and that's pretty terrible, right? But by the same token, if you put in the wrong settings, there's only 3 settings and they're the wrong ones, it's bam, this app would be perfect if I could only do X. And it doesn't have to be a frivolous thing. It could be something, important. It totally breaks the way I work with this application because it doesn't, I can't change this particular behavior and it drives me insane. And then the application is no good for you. And everyone's got one of those, and you can't include everybody. So that's the art of it, figuring out for most people, these are the top 5 most important things that should be settings because neither decision is clearly the right thing to do. And that's what I'm going to go with. And that is sort of an art more than anything else. So when I hear like a managery type person giving a pat answer like, oh, they pay us to make decisions for them. And I know some people want settings, but most people don't. And people applaud that. I'm like, that's like a platitude. It's not, if I know that's backed by the good taste to know which ones to set, then that's fine. But if I just hear it in isolation, I'm like, well, I'm not impressed by that statement. Maybe I'm being mean to Tim Cook. I don't know.
Well, no, I don't think you're being mean to Tim Cook, but what I think is hard is to realize, or at least hard for me anyway, is to realize that Tim may not be the man that knows that, unlike Steve, but he's smart enough to find the person, man or woman, that can make that call and empower them to do so. And I think giving Johnny Ive and Craig Federici a little bit more control is evidence of that I think Tim knows that he's not that guy, but he will empower the guy or girl that is that guy or girl. Did that make any sense at all?
Yeah, like he's got it. It's unfair to him because only one guy can be on that stage, and it's got to be him. So he has to speak for the whole company, right? I mean, where like you said, we're just kind of spoiled by Steve Jobs, where he could speak about that particular topic. Like it was the reverse with Steve Jobs. When Steve Jobs would talk about like supply chains and inventory and international business, then you could tell he was not talking about something that he was deeply knowledgeable about, but he was merely channeling Tim Cook. And it's weird to see that reverse now, when Tim is talking about financial stuff and supply chains. That's like him talking, and the other times it's him representing the rest of the company.
Well, I think, first of all, I think it's worth pointing out that Steve did make tons of bad decisions, and he did often rely on the people below him arguing with him until he relented, and sometimes he didn't relent and shipped bad decisions to the public, and then had to go back on those. So there's that. Anyway, I think, John, you're being a little bit mean to Tim Cook here. I think, you look at this guy talk. And I think, I'm about halfway through the video. I read the live stream last night as it was happening, but the live stream really does not capture it very well. First of all, the live streams generally paraphrase. They don't usually say the exact words because they usually can't keep up. And so, it helps to watch the video to really get an idea of what he said, exactly what he said and how he said it. And you look at this guy speak, and he is a rock. I mean, he is rock stable, rock solid. He was the same with Congress. Like, you can't make this guy flinch. And I think if he was mainly just repeating things he was told or things he had been taught by the lower down people about the product philosophies and stuff, I don't think he would be quite as solid when talking about them. And I think you'd see him doing a lot more, misstatements or kind of awkward, clumsy handling of the statements. But he doesn't do that. He's rock solid. And so I think he really has internalized everything he needs to internalize to be that kind of to be the CEO of a product focused company like this. I really think that he knows a lot more and that he has a lot more of these sensibilities than you give him credit for here.
Well, what I'm looking for is basically like, I don't think he doubts that he's shaky on any of the principles, but when it comes down to it, as I said, the tricky part about this is unlike a lot of the economic stuff, is not a science. It's more of an art, and he's not the one with that gut feeling that is going to drive the company. As you said, Steve Jobs' gut was wrong plenty of times too, but for the most part, in the big sweeping decisions, like we should make a teal computer, we should make a music player, and it should be like this, and we should get into phones, and it's not going to ship until it's good enough for me. Like in the big things, his gut was what drove these things. So it's one thing to say, this abstract philosophy of we'll make decisions for you and choose what needs to be in the application and what doesn't. And it's another thing to know that is also the guy whose gut is going to guide big sweeping things like what is Mac OS 10 going to look like? The fact that it was all crazy and blue and shiny or whatever, right? Was that the right thing to do? The wrong thing to do? I mean, your gut can be wrong about these things, and like he's not the guy with that, right?
That's true.
Even though he understands the principles. Like I said, I think it's basically the reverse of Jobs, because whenever Jobs talked about the economic stuff, he was a smart guy. He knew all the principles, but when it came down to it, to decide like which supplier should do what and how much of the flash memory should we pre-buy, and is this a good deal, or we're going to be saddled with tons of LCDs that we don't need, or should we wait for this? He wasn't the guy to make that call, but he just understood all the underlying concepts. And it's probably true that Tim Cook is much, like you said, much more solid when talking about topics that he's not the super duper expert in than Jobs was, because when Jobs did talk about economics, he sounded more like he was somebody merely parroting things that he learned from other people, even though he also probably understood them. But I think the thing that is in Tim Cook's favor during this entire thing, and especially like I think back to last year's WWDC, which it probably came across in the keynote, but I mean, we were there and we saw him as a speck on the stage or whatever, but you can kind of feel it in the room that Tim Cook has the same enthusiasm and passion, and he's not faking it, that Steve Jobs had for these things. I think about the time when he was on stage talking about like the blind guy using the iPad to like walk around the woods and everything. Unless he's an Academy Award winning actor, he was not faking like the fact that made him feel like what he's doing with his career in life is meaningful, right? More so than all the stuff they ask him about market share and different models of phones or whatever. He is really, touched by the idea that the things he's making are changing the world in a touchy-feely Apple, goofy kind of way. And that I think is his best asset as CEO. Well, okay, second best. Second to his, expertise in the job that he had before he was CEO, is the fact that he really is enthusiastic about this stuff. And he's not a bean counter, and he's not just out there to sort of steer a ship or he's not just a manager for a manager's sake. Right. That's why he left Compaq or wherever he was before. Why John Scully left Pepsi. You don't want to sell sugar water. You want to come with Steve and change the world.
And with Tim, too, I think we've really seen over the last year especially, we've really seen him just develop this incredible image of just not only being an absolute rock about everything, and this is definitely a guy you'd want running your company, but you can also tell that he's not an idiot on any level. Like, like to use a Steve Jobs word, like he's not a bozo at all. Like you can tell this guy is sharp and knows exactly what he's doing. But he's also, and he's very deliberate in what he does. It doesn't feel like he's like, throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. It seems like he's really being very deliberate about everything he does. But also he projects a very a very nice personality when he speaks publicly. He seems extremely polite, well-spoken, personable, but still firm and strong. And so I think he has like the perfect image of what you'd want a CEO of an important company to have.
And he's extremely deliberate in the way he speaks as well. Something I wish I could be better about is taking a moment to think about what you were going to say, especially in like a one-on-one conversation. This podcast is a little bit different, but if you're in a serious conversation, say, remember that I do consulting for a living. So say I'm at a client and they ask me a question, my natural inclination is to fire off an answer immediately. And one thing that I respect deeply about Tim is that he will sit there and allow a silence so he can collect his thoughts and make sure that his answer is a great one, not just a good one, not just an acceptable one, but a great one.
That was a big Steve Jobsism. Steve Jobs would just let that pause, and at a certain point when Steve Jobs did it, you wondered, is he pausing together his thoughts, or is this kind of a head game where he's pausing, like he already knows what he's going to say, but he's just like, yeah, a little longer. Like in that, what was that, WWC 1998 or whatever thing where he was doing Q&A, and the guy asked him the obnoxious question about. I forget what the obnoxious question was. Like, it was clear that you don't know what you're doing, or say he was angry about OpenDoc or something or whatever. And the pause after that, I should time it in the video. It's like so long where he's waiting for the response there. If I could think of a couple more mean things to say about Tim Cook, it's not mean. It's just like we're all comparing to Steve Jobs, right? And with any kind of powerful person speaking publicly, like you basically get two choices. You get the guy who really truly believes what he's saying and is earnest about it, and the guy who says exactly the right thing, but gives some kind of hint that he also knows that it's BS. And a good example is, we didn't get to talk about this, the congressional thing where Tim Cook is up there explaining Apple's business and everything. And Tim Cook did nothing wrong. Like, he did exactly what you're supposed to do. And I can't decide I kind of decide. For me, I think it's worse to be the guy who really believes that everything you're telling Congress is the 100% straight, honest truth. Like, the fact that he'd never mentioned why they have these things overseas and how it was a tax avoidance scheme and stuff like that. Like, everything he said was true. It was just sort of an error of omission. And I feel more comfortable, like, if Steve Jobs was doing it, he would make it clear that everyone knows this is BS. Because everyone watching knows it's BS. Congress knows it's BS. Tim Cook knows. We all know it's like kind of it's theater, right? But sometimes I think that for a second or two, I think that Tim Cook really believes what he's saying. I'm like, wait a second, he knows what's really, he's no dummy. We're all in on this or whatever. But he's so earnest, and you're like, oh my God, maybe he really believes that. Maybe, I'm like, no, come on, he doesn't really believe that. And to me, that's worse. I would rather have, like, the guy who's in on the sort of shared delusion that we're all, the suspension of disbelief for this theater type thing, than the true believer type thing. Because the second Tim Cook really believes that everything he omitted in discussing Apple's various tax shelters doesn't exist, then we know, we're in trouble. I mean, that's just testament to how incredibly earnest and honest. Like, for a second, he can make me believe that he really believes it, but I don't know.
Before we exit the Tim Cook all things D topic, I do want to point out also that a lot of people have said, oh, he hasn't really said anything here, he didn't say anything new, or he didn't learn anything. And I think that's all crap. I think he said quite a lot. And he said it in the Apple way and in the Tim Cook way, but I think he said quite a lot of interesting things.
That's criminology. I mean, we're all like, if you go back, I would watch the Steve Jobs one, and you're all just looking to see, like, he's never going to say it. So there's reporters who have no idea about, just generic reporters who, like, they go through it and go, oh, it doesn't seem like he said anything. But for people who are following every single fart that comes out of Apple, when you ask him, what do you think about big screens? And I guess you guys are making one or whatever. And the first thing out of his mouth is, well, we're not making one yet. I mean, like, that's the answer. Like, that is the biggest answer you're ever going to get out of anything. Like, even Steve Jobs was never that open even on his wildest days.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, and what he's saying is perfectly clear. We're not making one yet. We're not ruling it out for the future or whatever. He doesn't say that if they don't have a larger screen phone, like, in the planning stages already. And little things like that were dropped everywhere about, timelining the television, timelining anything that's wearable. It reminds me of Steve Jobs way, like, I don't remember when I was way before the iPhone, like 5 years or something before that, when people were asking Apple about PDAs. That was the big thing to do. It's like, is Apple going to make a PDA? Like, if they tried to buy Palm or Handspring or something and been rebuffed, and not that they ever announced that, but it was all secret, rumors and stuff. And people kept asking about PDAs, and at a certain point, Apple would give answers and no comments or whatever. But at a certain point, Steve Jobs said to some reporter, we really believe that phones are where the future of this business is going to be. Boom, Apple's making a phone. Like, that's all you needed.
Right.
And that's why for years my friends and I were like, when is the iPhone coming? And we would just call it the iPhone because it was the iMac and the iPod Air. When is the iPhone coming? And then we started to lose faith. We're like, maybe they're never going to make a phone. It's been such a long time. But, like, back then, like, when you make a statement like that to a reporter, you might as well just come out and say exactly what you're doing. I guess reporters can't report on it because it would be, he didn't really say that. But for people reading the tea leaves, it's all out there in the open in his answers.
I would say specifically, he seemed to confirm in his Tim Cook and in the Apple way, he seemed to confirm that they are working on some kind of watch-like device that includes multiple types of sensors and serves multiple functions. Didn't you get that impression from what he said?
Wearable. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that wearable stuff. I think there might be something to that. It's a really interesting area.
Right, but it has to do multiple things.
Nudge.
It can't just do one thing, and it has to have multiple sensors. I'm thinking he's looking to replace that Nike Fuel Band on his wrist.
He's like describing his product obliquely at that point.
Right. I mean, I think that was a very clear, not even a hint. That was like beating you over the head. We are doing something like a watch that's going to have multiple sensors.
Yeah, that combined with like the entering new product categories from the earning call, like, I mean, and
possibly as soon as this fall, it seems.
Yeah, the people freak out about it, like we did with the phone thing. The phone didn't come out for like 5 years or whatever it was. It was some insane amount. It seemed like forever, right? It doesn't mean that the watch is coming out next week. Like, that's the problem with the echo chamber of the news. Is like, oh, a watch is coming. It's going to come out any second, right? No, like the timelines in these things are huge. You just read the tea leaves to see, all right, is this something that Apple's even looking at? Because if you had asked him if Apple was thinking of making a car, his answer would have not been, the car space is really interesting. I think a car made by Apple could be really interesting, and it would have to use multiple sensors. No, he would say, no, we're not interested. Like, it's a different answer, right? So all it does is tell you that something that you wear that you purchase from Apple that's not a clip-on iPod Shuffle is potentially in the future of this company, and tells you nothing about the timeline other than it's probably not a decade from now.
Well, but even on the timeline, I think he was pretty clear that we're going to see a new category from Apple like this fall or early next year.
Yeah, that could have been the TV had he not put the kibosh on that in his answers at the D conference, right? Because the earnings call was like new category, and everyone's like, okay, is the new category TV, which has been rumored for a really long time, or is the new category something that you wear, which has also been rumored? And then fast forward to the conference, he gets asked both questions, gives very different answers, and you're like, all right, I guess it's the thing you wear.
Now, was it him that said that nobody wears watches anymore?
Yeah, but it was interesting. He said, like, the live streams kind of transcribed this quickly, but what he actually said was, like,
For something to work here, you first have to convince people it's so incredible that they want to wear it, because you two guys are wearing watches. If we had a room full of 10 to 20-year-olds, and we said, everybody stand up that has a watch on, I'm not sure anybody would stand up.
Yeah.
I don't see it.
10 to 20-year-old. I mean, yeah, okay, so the guy deals with data. That sounded a lot like they did a survey. Like it
Right.
sounded like that was data that they had looked up already. Like he wasn't just like that's the kind of thing that Steve would just kind of wing from his gut.
They did
Tim,
market
I don't think
research
would.
on it.
I think Tim, he was talking as though they were already looking into this, and he like the comments about multiple sensors and about glasses sucking. I really think he was pretty clearly telling us there's going to be something here.
Apple under Steve
soonish.
Jobs did do lots of market research. Jobs liked to downplay it, and he would say they didn't do focus groups for their design, which is true. But the best example I can think of that is, speaking of nobody wears watches anymore, is when people were asking about, is Apple going to do is it pre-iPad, is Apple going to do some sort of reading device or whatever? And he said, nobody reads anymore. And then he threw out like a couple of statistics. And the only way he would know those statistics off the top of his head is from Apple's own market research that they had done in the planning stages for making the iPad, which was so clearly in development then. It's like, by quoting a statistic that, is supposed to be, shooting down the argument of the person who's saying, oh, you should make this thing. Oh, nobody reads anymore. Certain people say that, surveys show that people from this age group, I forget what statistic he threw out, but like, you don't know that statistic off the top of your head if you had not investigated it. So it's the same type of thing. Yeah, they did do market research. They continue to do market research to see, to decide what kind of product they're going to make. I don't know if Tim does more of it than Steve. I know Steve definitely wanted to downplay the idea that it's anything other than springing from their creativity. But yeah, they're a big company. Of course, they do market research. So I'm sure they know exactly how many people of what ages wear watches or would be willing to wear something, and so on.
Well, right. And to that end, when he says, if you have a room full, was it 10, 20-year-olds or 10 to 20-year-olds? It doesn't matter.
I'll have
Whatever.
to rewind. I think it was 10 to 20-year-olds.
10 to 20-year-olds.
But
To be honest, it doesn't matter. The point I'm driving at is when he says, oh, nobody in the 10 to 20-year-old range or whatever the statistic was wears a watch, is that like a Barney Stinson challenge accepted moment? Or is that him saying, no, really, nobody wants a watch and there's nothing we can do to stop it?
Well, what
No,
he
it's
was
started.
saying, what he was saying, like the theme of what he was saying was basically that if you're gonna convince people to wear a watch, it has to be really, really good. That like and implying that what's on the market now in the field of smartwatches is not good enough to convince people to wear a watch who weren't already and who weren't nerds like people who are buying Google Glass. And so it sounded like what he was saying was a combination of Google Glass is a total flop and nobody will wear it, and we think there's something to be had in the watch area, but nothing else out there is good enough yet, which is typical Apple stuff to say before they enter a market.
Right. That's exactly my point. Is they're saying, well, right now it all sucks, but the underlying, but under your breath comment is, oh, but we'll show you.
Exactly.
It's like men's hats, in the 40s where all, you look at those old movies, all the men on the street in New York City were all wearing hats, right? And then eventually that fell out of favor, and then nobody wears a hat to work, and in fact, it would be rude to wear a hat to work if you're wearing like a baseball hat or something, right? So, men's dress hats, and I guess women's dress hats to some degree, fell out of fashion. So if you had asked, 60 years ago, how many men wore a hat today on their way to work, all their hands would go. Well, I think watches are like that, in part because, I think actually it started with pagers. Remember when people just started looking at the pagers to see what time it was, right? Once you had some other way to tell what time it was, other than a watch, watches changed from this practical thing that you had to wear so you got places on time into merely like jewelry, like a fashion accessory. And people still do wear watches, but I even the people who do, I wonder if they still pick up their phone to tell what time it is, right? So like him saying, people don't wear watches is because like the function of a watch as a timekeeper that goes on your wrist, we don't need that anymore because that functionality has been subsumed in these other smart devices. But if we can make something that you can put on your wrist that suddenly does have value to you beyond just telling you what time it was, then maybe that would be a good thing. So he's saying there's all those wrists out there that don't have watches on because watches are not worth the time, not worth putting on your wrist. Those wrists are just waiting there for something. And it doesn't have to be wrist. Who knows where these things are going to be attached to your body? But something that you wear, probably on your wrist. That's what he's saying with that answer is all those wrists out there are just crying out for something really cool from Apple to stick on them. Do either one of you guys wear a watch?
No.
I didn't until I'd say a couple of years ago, and I've always enjoyed them, and I've always told myself that if I ever hit it big and sell everything that I own, that I would get myself a stupidly expensive watch, and by that I mean like several $100s as opposed to 20. But I keep telling myself I want to buy myself a watch, and I haven't worn one in a few years, and I'm too cheap to buy one.
There was this
like
guy
nice
in the old Tumblr office. I don't want to say who he was in case it would cause any problems, but there was this guy who shared the office, and he had a watch dealer come in like twice a year to show him like these like new fancy like really like $10,000 watches. And it was just like, this like, kind of short, thick guy with like a nondescript briefcase would come in, open up the briefcase, and show off, 30 grand worth of watches right there. And it's like this whole cult of like watch people.
Oh,
yeah, it's like camera people, but even more so because cameras have more of a function. Like, once they tell time, beyond that, everything else is basically just fashion.
Yeah.
And although I was just on a podcast with Guy and Renee, and I don't remember if this part of it was after the recording had ended or if they'll stick it in, so you can forgive me for repeating it, but we were talking about the watch thing, and what I said to them was that this is such a dangerous area for Apple or any other company because once you put something on your body in a way that counts as wearing, you enter this whole other realm of crazy, illogical, nonsensical, ego-entangled decision-making. Because, the iPod Shuffle, you clip onto your clothes. And most people would say you are not wearing an iPod Shuffle. It's like, oh, it's just my iPod, but it attaches to my clothing for convenient carrying. But once you have something that, oh, I'm wearing this, then, forget it. It's like many people will take an electronic device, carry it in their pocket, or even clip it to their clothes. But the thing that people are willing to wear that is acknowledged as a wearing thing is totally dictated by things that Apple really doesn't have any control over. And I'm sure Apple's up to the challenge, but what a challenge that is. Give me something that I will want to wear, because then it becomes a fashion statement, an expression of self, much more so than even carrying a laptop or a phone. Even those things do, you carry a part of your image with that thing. I feel like wearing is like the next level. Because basically, if you make this thing ugly, in the opinion of some buyer, they're going to be like, this is the most awesome device ever. I think it's awesome, but I'm not going to wear it. And like that's part of the Google Glass thing is because that's wearing. Once you put that thing on your head, that counts as wearing something. And if it looks awkward or geeky and gives you a great image, no matter how awesome it is, you're just going to be like, it's hard for me to relate because everything I own is unfashionable and ugly and makes me look stupid. But other people have lots of their self-image tied up into looking good. And you have to sort of I guess not. It's like, not step on those landmines to get a product into their hands that they're willing to wear. Lots of nerds are willing. I mean, look at the people willing to wear glass. Some people just have no barrier and like, sure, I'll put anything on if it has some practical value.
You should get Google Glass, John.
Or futuristic. Even I have my limits. But yeah, and that is such a dangerous part about wearable tech. And I don't know how Apple in particular is going to navigate that, because they're not going to make 700 models of this. Samsung is going to make 700 models of the ripoff product, right? And you'll be able to find one that works for you. It's the same thing with the phone cases, right? Even though you don't wear a phone, people buy the phone, but then there's a bazillion cases. And some of the cases you find hideous, but other people love. Rhinestone-encrusted things, or wooden cases, or things that look like they're made of Legos, or brushed metal. Like, that's how people are able to even come to terms with the things they carry a lot of the time. If you can't do something similar to something that you wear, Apple's going to be in trouble, because no matter how neutral and tasteful they make it, some person's going to say, I wouldn't wear that. I won't wear that.
Yes, but you're also not considering that I think Apple, at the moment anyway, is more than not very trendy. And so it's trendy and kind of cool now to have a silver laptop with a piece of fruit shining on the lid. And I could swear that I had read stories years ago that people would connect iPod earbuds or iPhone earbuds to non-Apple devices just so they also had the white crap dangling over their ears.
They would do that, but that's what I'm saying. I think there is a part of personal expression embodied in fashionable electronic devices that you carry, and this is like the next level, because you're not just carrying this, you're wearing it. Like, it's so crazy. Like, think about shoes, how crazy people are about the shoes that they're willing and not willing to wear. How many times do you see somebody else's shoes and you think, man, I would never wear those shoes, but the person wearing those loves those shoes. They paid $300 for them, right? It's such an incredible range, and people will reject products that are perfectly good in every possible way because they'll just say, I can't wear that, I won't wear that. And yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how Apple navigates this, because these are extremely dangerous waters.
They are, but if you think about Apple's normal devices, they're extremely simple and tasteful and, generally speaking, look good. Surely not to everyone, but generally speaking, there's not a lot to them. They're not very flashy, and they just look good. And so I do agree with you, and I think that this is a whole new territory they're not used to, but I also think that they'll probably navigate these waters pretty darn well.
Well, if they do the naked robotic core thing again, I mean, like I said, it's worked for them with the phone, because like you said, they make something tasteful. It's very, very, very unadorned, very subdued or whatever, but some people want it to be pink and rhinestone encrusted. So there better be a way for me to take a pink rhinestones and shove them all over the Apple iWatch. Otherwise, I'm not wearing that thing, because it looks just so boring and ugly, and it looks like a techno bauble, and mine needs to have rhinestones because I'm fabulous, right?
John, I cannot wait to see you with your pink rhinestone encrusted watch. I am extremely excited for it.
Yeah, it'll go great with my Motorola clamshell phone. Now with color screen.
Oh, God.
This is what happens when you get three nerds talking about fashion.
Yeah, it never ends well.
This is fantastic.
Goodness.
All right, we should do our next sponsor.
I was just about to ask.
This is a good time. All right, our next sponsor, they need no introduction, but the sad thing is that won't apply to all of you, because there are still people out there who have not bought this yet. It's Solver. And I don't know if it's pronounced Solver. I say Solver in my head, but I also said Oxygen in my head, so my head's not always right, I guess. It's Solver. So it's Soulver. And what this is an app for the Mac, iPhone, and iPad. And they told me to just wing it because they knew that I'm a massive fan of this, so they didn't even give me a script. Solver is basically a hybrid between a calculator, a notepad, and a spreadsheet. If you can kind of think of that. And I've done, if you just search my site for Solver, you'll see I posted about it like 10 times over the years. Oh my God, you have to basically, if I'm working, I have this app open. I have it open now, even for a podcast. I always have it open. What I suggest you do, download this app. I'm pretty sure there's a trial. They didn't even tell me. I should probably go look that up. I'm pretty sure, yes, there is a trial. Download the app, give it a shot. What you want to do is just, once you install this app, even just the trial, just hide Calculator. If you have it in your dock, take it out of your dock. Never launch Calculator again. And I suggest trying it on the Mac first, because that's really, in my opinion, that's where I use it the most. That's where it's best. Try it out instead of Calculator, and anytime you would try to figure out some little computation, type it into a Scratch Solver document instead. And once you start using it for like a day, you will instantly realize, oh my god, why have I been using stupid calculator apps besides this all these years? Like, why have I taken so long to find this app? It's basically a scratch pad for numbers. So ever since I started using this, I don't know, 2005 or something like that. They've been around forever. Started using it forever ago, and ever since I started using it, I hardly ever use spreadsheets anymore. And I never use calculator anymore. And it's for for programmers, for people who are just doing simple calculations. Basically, if you're the kind of person who has ever launched the calculator app on your computer, you can probably use this and you can probably benefit from it. So it's called Solver, Soulver. It's $20 in the Mac App Store or directly from their site. They also have some volume license discounts. You can get, for instance, a four computer household pack for only $25. You can get volume licenses. This is the kind of thing, like, if I was running a business with employees, which I guess I won't do because I apparently hate doing that, but if I was running a business with employees, I would buy one of these for every employee and just hide calculator on the computers through some kind of like group IT policy and put this on there instead. Really, it's that good. So they also have for iOS. Now, I use it for iOS, although I will say I use it for Mac more. But on iOS, it's really great. First of all, on the iPad, there is no built-in calculator from Apple. So you need to install something if you ever need a calculator. Might as well install this. It's awesome for lots of different things. It's all, and it does formulas. It does you can use variables. You can use simple logic. You can use labels. I mean, it's really an extremely high-functioning application for doing any kind of number scratchpad work. It's just so good. Anything that you would otherwise use a simple spreadsheet for, like, oh, let me figure out what my S3 costs are going to be this month for my bandwidth. Like, you just use Solver. It's just so perfect for this. So anyway, it's $5 for iPad. It's $3 for iPhone. I even use it. I know this is going on long, but I even use it as a like a scoreboard when I'm playing games in real life. Like if you're playing like 500 Rummy with people, playing any kind of like table game, you need some way to keep score between rounds. I type things into Solver. Every person will have a line labeled with their initials or their name, and then I'll just do score plus. And every single time there's a round, I'll add another one to their name. You can always see, leave it out, you can always see what everyone's total is and what each round was before that. There's just so many uses for this app. I use it constantly. Go get Solver, please. For the love of all that is good, go get Solver. It is that good. You need this app. It's by Aqualia, and I'm not even going to try to spell it. I'll put it in the show notes. It's aqualia.com/Solver, Soulver, or find it in the Mac App Store or the iOS App Store. Thanks to Solver for sponsoring.
So, not to pile on at all, but Solver, whatever it's called, is one of the few apps that triple dipped. In other words, I had to pay on all three platforms, and I didn't feel bad about it because it really is that good. And the other thing that I wanted to point out is that, how a lot of people, ourselves included, have complained and moaned about how when you're building a calculator app for a computer, you don't really, and actually, Marco, you wrote a post about this, I think.
Yeah.
You don't want to be encumbered by what's physical. And Solver, whatever, is a great midway between a spreadsheet and a calculator. And they were able to do that because they chucked out all the cruft and old stuff from the physical world and just made something that's really great in the computing world. Now that I think of it, I just totally stole a blog post, didn't I?
Yeah, that's entirely my blog post. But yeah, it's like I believe I called it overdoing the interface metaphor. And the idea,
Right.
This was like back before most skeuomorphism debates, but the idea was like, if you make a computer calculator, you don't want to bring over like a big grid of buttons that you have to click on and then a single line display. Like, that's stupid. The computers can do so much more than that, and if you just let them. And so Solver it's a calculator app that was clearly designed for computers and not designed to try to mimic what old calculators used to be. It was designed for what computers can actually do and do well. And it's also it's a NS document based app on the Mac, and I forget. I don't know if the iOS versions are document based. I'm pretty sure they are, and because what that means is on the Mac you get all of the line and mountain line, autosave and version support, and it uses iCloud to sync everything, and it actually works. I've tried it between my laptop and my computer. It's great. Really, it's just a fantastic app, and the guys even told me they're like you can probably sell it better than we can, and I think I've basically devoted every chance I get over the last few years to talk about this app, I've devoted to trying to convince the world, please, for the love of God, just use this app. Trust me, it is that good. And I mean, even like when the Mac App Store came out, I bought it, even though I already owned it. I bought it on the Mac App Store just to A, give them more money, and B, have a quick way to install it after any reinstall or on any other computer that I owned. It really is that good.
I can't believe it took you guys that long for the SKU word to come up. I would have led with that. Basically, the calculator is to skeuomorphism, as this is to the opposite of that. Yeah, I'm also a big fan, although I pronounce it as solver because I like that better. The other thing I'll add is the reason I use this app all the time, and I actually use the dashboard widget of another like skeuomorphic calculator occasionally, but I also have solver open all the time, although I just quit it before launching Skype because I wanted to free up some memory to make sure Skype it feels good, is that this thing also does the stuff that you might find yourself typing into Google for, and I use it to do math in a lazy way. Like I write 27 is the percentage of 359. Write that into solver and it gives you the answer. You could do that math yourself. We all know basic algebra. You can do division and multiplication and figure it out. But did I do the division wrong, or did I put the wrong thing in the right place or whatever? You can do 5,300 bytes squared in kilobytes, and it will do the conversions for you and give you. It does. I mean,
there's unit conversions, there's stock
unit
price
conversions,
lookups.
the feature I like about it the best is that thing where you can write in a single English sentence that expresses what you want to know, and it will just give you the answer of it. And I find it faster to go to Solver than to go to a Google search box and type these things in.
Right, because it's a native app. It's all right there. It's all running already, and it's just a text box. It's great.
Yeah, and I think it is the one app where I find autosave the most satisfying, because before autosave, I didn't like the fact that it had the little modified dot, and I would quit, and it would ask me to save, and I was like, just save everything all the time, and now it does.
Yeah, it's fantastic, really. I mean, it's hard to describe how good it is in just one ad spot, which is why this is taking us so long. But believe me, you gotta try this app. It's so good, and the people who develop it seem like really nice guys. I've talked to them a lot over email the last 5 years or so, and you just want to support this. And they're always putting out updates to fix any little problems that come up. Although honestly, I've rarely ever seen a problem. I mean, it's just so good. It's one of those apps that it's like your text editor of choice. It's like one of those apps that you can look at whatever you spend on this and say, this has helped me make so much more money than whatever it costs. This is so worth the minimal price I paid for it once years ago, because it's that important to what I do.
All right, so let's just continue to talk about this fantastic app the rest of the show. In terms of timely topics, the only one I've got left is WWDC, but I haven't had a proper think about what predictions I want to be wrong about. So is there anything that you two wanted to bring up?
Oh, yeah, because that's coming up.
Yeah, we've only got... next week should be our predictions show. But I didn't want to do that today, but can if we have to, and I'll be even more wrong if we do it today.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm ready. It's much better to do the prediction show right before WWDC, because then we have the highest chance of being right.
Right.
You're going to cheat. You want to cheat and wait for all of the last.
Well, honestly, do you think anything's going to change between this week and next week with predictions?
No, but our knowledge of it. Well, yeah, but there'll be something. Like, I mean, all the obvious things that are like in the invitation is like, I bet they'll show the new version of iOS and macOS 10. That's great, But we want to know what else. Is there anything else? Or like, what are the features? Did we get a leaked iOS 7 screenshot somewhere? some blurry image of
Haswell notebooks.
Yeah, is that now, or is it going to be announced, or is it going to just have a little new badge after we walk out of the thing, like the Mac Pros did, because it's not important enough? But those details will be clearer by next week, I think.
I bet Haswell MacBook Pro updates would at least warrant like an 8-slide Phil Schiller mention. Yeah,
no, I mean, they spent a lot of time on the new Retinas last year, and granted that was it's the first Retina, Mac, but certainly it's worth something, some slides showing how much faster and lower power they are and all that good stuff.
Here's an update to our notebook line.
And Lord knows they're not going to be showing us new Mac Pros, so we want some hardware that can be in a clear acrylic tube outside when we walk out of the room, They should just put an old Mac Pro in there and see how many people gather around it.
You know what they should do? They should take an old Mac Pro and slap a new sticker on the side. I hear that works.
I think... I think what we're going to... I guess this is becoming predictions anyway. I think what we're going to see is mostly the focus is going to be on iOS 7, but I'm actually really curious to see what we learn about Mac OS 10.9.
Yeah, because if they keep with their pattern of cat modifier cat, then this comes up as cat again, right? Like that four releases is a cycle, cat modifier cat, and so either they're done with cats, or we got to have a new cat. I have been since like last year or for a long time. Like I have to give a name for the thing I put in my notes file. And mine is called Lynx, Lynx. Not that I think that's what the cat name is going to be, but when I asked my brain, well, brain, you have to type in something else to be your placeholder for 10.9, and I don't want to write 10.9. I wrote in Lynx. Because I can't, can you even think of another? It's like Ocelot and all sorts of BS things. Either cat names are done, which I'm perfectly fine with. Good, can the cat names. I'm all for it. Or my brain says Lynx. So, but I have no idea what they're going to call it. I've heard nothing.
Well, what's the modifier going to be then?
I don't know. Mountain Lynx. Just make up.
Graphical links.
Snow Lynx.
Graphical links.
This is another reason that Lynx won't be the name, right? But I'm happy to be done with cats.
Well, do you think there's going to be a 10.10? Because maybe there won't be a modifier cat for this next one. Maybe they will change the naming convention to not have 10.10.
I think they'll do. Well, I think it feels like what are they going to go to something where you're like, oh, this is not 10. It's like this one goes to 11. Like, if you want to do some sort of thing like that, you can't just do that as a marketing push. There has to be something to go along with that, and I don't see any kind of change that's that radical in the 10.10 time frame. Like 10.10 should be the modifier cat release of whatever the hell they have cooked up for this thing, but who knows? I mean, 4 releases is definitely a pattern, but they can break the pattern wherever the hell they feel like it. So yeah, I mean, obviously, for obvious reasons, I'm very interested in what's going on there, and I'm less interested in what's going on in iOS, and I'm sure iOS will be by far the more dominant focus in the news, and I'm not expecting anything earth-shattering out of 10.9. But the question is, all right, well, then what the hell is it?
Yeah, that's I'm really curious to just see what, besides the name, of course, which is very interesting, but what do they what will 10.9 be for the marketing? First of all, what will they market about the features of it, and then will there be anything interesting for developers? Will there be substantial improvements to the core in any significant way? What is there to do? And it's only been a year since Mountain Lion, so now that they're on their shorter cycle, so it's not going to be it's not going to be a massive rewrite of anything.
Well, there's plenty to do, but it's the most interesting question is, given how much attention Apple wants to focus on OS X, they can't do everything. What things do they prioritize? Because that will sort of give you an idea of what they feel is important. Do they just do things that they would have had to do anyway because they're changes to the core OS to benefit most OSs? With Lion and Mountain Lion, they almost entirely focused on things that bring together the mental space of the Mac and iOS in terms of making the applications look a certain way, having them have iCloud integration, trying to make it so, hey, you've used your iPhone or your iPad, this Mac is not all that different. Take a look. Look at the Contacts app. See how it's kind of the same? Stuff like that. And the autosave, hey, you don't have to save things on iOS, and to varying degrees of success, but that was where they were putting their energy. And they weren't, for example, putting it into a new file system or, making the OS faster, improving the virtual memory system, changing out the kernel to have better, all sorts of nitty-gritty things that would be totally interesting to someone like me. But Apple's saying, well, we're not getting any bang for the buck out of that. Don't spend all your time working on that. Instead, spend your time in this other area. So they did that with Lion, and they sort of repented a little bit with Mountain Lion to say where they had overreached and sort of shore things up and put a third panel into the stupid book metaphor app. Well, a book can have 3 parts, right? But then one of them has to be half of it, and the other one has to be 25 and 25%. Ugh. Anyway, do they keep doing that, or do they concentrate in a new area this time? And Fusion Drive would have been an obvious thing, but they already released that. Fusion Drive missed Mountain Lion, and I feel like they wanted to get it into that, but they're all right, well, fine, screw it. Fusion Drive, it's not tied to an OS release. It just appears suddenly with some new iMacs and stuff.
Well, and that was also a good way to sell hardware. Like the way Siri was tied to the 4S. That was a good way to say, even though you can create it now on the command line. Nobody really knows that. There's no interface and disk utility, and no one's doing it really except super nerds. For the most part, it's if you want the combination of very high speed and very high capacity, you must buy a new iMac or Mac Mini.
Well, I give them a pass on that because unlike the Siri thing, anything having to do with low-level disk drive crap is really sensitive to the specific mechanism and, drivers and everything involved there, to the point where I really believe that basically it's not that it won't work, it's just that they didn't QA it in any configuration. Like, they only had time, and, they only QA'd it in these specific configurations. And it probably will work perfectly fine in tons of other configurations, but, like, what if your SSD either does or doesn't support the trim command, or has some other feature, or ends up running into some pathological case that they never tested for or whatever. So I don't blame them for being super conservative with the supported hardware there. But, like, they didn't hold it for the next OS release because they had this hardware they wanted to ship. It just didn't make the OS that they wanted it to make. Like, in that WWDC session, they hinted that there was this thing that they would like to talk about but can't, and that was the Fusion Drive, right? Like, it just missed the release. Like, it didn't get on the boat for that one, and so they put it out mid-release. But Fusion Drive would be an awesome 10.9 feature. If they had announced that at WWDC, we'd be like, wow, this is great. 10.9's got some really cool features. You see that Fusion Drive? But now that's kind of spoiled by it already being out there. I mean, I'm sure they'll have sessions on it, and the support for it will be expanded and blah, blah, blah. But that kind of takes some of the wind out of its sail, and my eternal new file system thing, like, probably not this year either. Who knows?
Well, and actually, that just got me thinking. There's still a fair amount of Macs that have platter drives, right? Because we just mentioned the Fusion Drive, which is a half platter, well, maybe more than half platter, and also an SSD. But most of the lower end Macs or MacBooks and MacBook Pros, the non-Retina ones anyway, they all still have platter drives by default, right? So the reason I bring this up is I wonder if, and I'm looking mostly to John for your 2 cents on this, I wonder if the Mac line switches, if it can, let's assume it can, and if it switches to all flash hard drives, would that lead to easier choices in either creating or picking a new file system? Whereas right now they've kind of got a leg in two very different worlds where you have to support both the comparatively old and slow platters as well as this brand new, reasonably new, I should say, flash system. So if everything was flash and that's all we needed to worry about, would that be easier? And a corollary to that would be, would iOS jump to a different file system before the OS 10 does because everything on iOS is flash?
It's not going to jump to all flash, so, like, they're stuck with spinning drives for the foreseeable future. I was saying in a past episode of some podcast about what the next, assuming there are some Mac Pros or Mac Pro like machines or something, whatever, you know what I'm talking about. I thought that those will be Fusion Drive and you won't have a choice. Like, you won't be able to get it not as a Fusion Drive. You won't be able to get it to pure SSD because that storage is too small, and you won't be able to get it without an SSD. Like, you're getting Fusion Drive, period, because that is their medium-term solution for make it faster, but also let people store their gigantic libraries of stuff. And that's why they made it. Having the, flash versus spinning disk, what that split is going to force them to do if they ever get off their butts is use some form of native storage on the flash. Like, there are lots of other systems out there that do this type of thing. Like, file systems are designed for spinning things have particular behaviors of, like, access time, and sequential access is faster than random, and seeks really kill you, and, like, the whole file system is laid out in such a way to minimize those things, or hopefully laid out in a way to minimize. And all those things are either the opposite or just completely moot on SSDs because their performance characteristics are so different. Like, random access versus sequential access becomes less meaningful when you just got a bunch of chips that you're addressing, but they have their own particular quirks or whatever. So a file system layer on top of that is almost like, I mean, there are lots of file systems tailored to flash or whatever, but Apple's the kind of company who could use just, raw access to the NAND. I mean, particularly on iOS devices, like, why not? Like, everything is already there. You still have to provide the same interface to the application, so maybe that's a complication for them. But if they want to extract the maximum performance with the lowest overhead from flash, you don't need to go with the file system, not only just a file system that was designed for spinning disks, but you don't need what we think of as formally as a file system now. You just need to continue to provide the same interface, the same driver interface to the higher levels of the OS. So it looks like HFS, because it always has to look like HFS Plus, because all the APIs expect it to look like that. But under the covers, it doesn't have to be, right? So I think that they probably won't even do that, but the reasons I think they need a new file system have little to do with spinning disk versus flash. It just has to do with the fact that HFS is really old and crappy in all the ways that I've listed in my various articles complaining about this. And if they come up with a new one, I don't think it will matter that it's not 100% tailored to SSDs, it'll be fine. Like, and they'll put it on the spinning disks, and they'll probably also put it on the SSDs, and they'll use core storage to make Fusion Drive out of them, and hopefully we'll be happy.
All right. Well, fine then.
Well, fine then, yeah. No, like, the world you're thinking of was like, oh, wouldn't it be great? We don't have to worry about spinning disks anymore. We just use Flash, but it's just not here. Like, I mean, only Marco can get the big, and even that one can't hold his. Well, it probably was your iPhoto library is like 260 gigs or something.
Yeah, it actually does hold almost everything I have.
Yeah, but that's. I mean, it's not. That's not an average person's thing. Where I easily have I fill a terabyte drive easily. I can't. My next computer cannot have a terabyte drive as its main drive because that won't be big enough, right? Because and I'm not using that much stuff, and it's you can't just people still can't afford terabyte SSDs, and they won't be able to next year either, or probably the next year after that either. So for a long time we're gonna, and spinning drives keep getting bigger too, and Fusion Drive by all accounts is amazing in terms of how it makes it feel like it really is just an SSD, but you still get all that storage because people's usage patterns really are, you do just hit a small set of files over and over again.
Well, that's why I wonder if, like with Fusion Drive, I believe the ones that ship in the MX, they're only 128 gigs, right, on the SSD portion?
Yeah, it isn't cheap
big.
Out a little there,
and because the point is like it uses like a 4 gig write buffer, and then the rest of it is roughly 120 gigs worth of frequently accessed files or frequently accessed block storage, and if you think about there's really not that much reason why they couldn't also build that into a lot of the laptops except cost, and although the problem is the Retinas are already high priced items and are already all flash. So the Retinas, they won't fit in.
Spinning's not coming back to laptops.
Well, but they could get a little bit more life and a nice performance boost if they would build in a little tiny 128 gig module into the non-Retina laptops that still exist. The Air wouldn't need them. So I guess I'm talking myself out of this because the Air's already all flash. The Retina's already all flash.
Spinning is not coming.
And the other ones
are
all too cheap. They can't afford the margin. All right, never mind.
Yeah, I mean it's just basically it's just the whole desktop line is doing you got the iMac that's like, why would you even buy a big hunk of thing on a disk if it doesn't come with like a terabyte of storage? Because what's the point? Why not just get an Air and hook it up to a Thunderbolt display or whatever? And there's the Mini, which still has spinning, but also has the option to SSD, and those spinnings will probably go away too. It's really just the Mac Pro because it's got the big bays and you can put the big drives in there. And for people who have huge amounts of data, SSDs just are still way too expensive for that. And the spinning disks keep getting bigger and cheaper. And it's like, boy, you're leaving money on the table if you don't have a solution to let people take advantage of that cheap storage. And they do. Apple has a solution. It's there waiting for them, so they're going to use it. It's medium term. It's not going to go away today. It's not going to go away tomorrow. It will go away once SSDs get big enough and cheap enough to serve as the one and only complete main drive for a normal person. As long as I guess the size of the pictures we're taking with our cameras don't scale with the same rate that SSD storage scales.
Right. Oops. All right. With that, let's wrap it up.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks a lot to our two sponsors, Solver by Aqualia Software. Go to aqualia.com/solver. We'll link to that in the show notes. And Oxygen for Oxygen for Cocoa from RAM Object Software. It's spelled Oxygen though with an E on the end. You'll see. Go to ramobjectsoftware or go to ramobjects.com/oxygen with an E on the end and use coupon code ATP13 for 20% off. Thanks a lot, guys.
Now the show is over. They didn't even mean to begin, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. John didn't do any research. Marco and Casey wouldn't let him, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. And you can find the show notes at atp.fm. And if you're into Twitter, you can follow them at CASEYLISS. So that's Casey Liss, MARCOARMENT, Marco Arment, SIRAC, USA Syracuse. It's accidental. They didn't mean to. Accidental. Tech
said on the show, it's a good title.
Oh,
Cat,
okay.
cat, comma, modifier cat.
Yeah.
I agree. And also, I should add that,
was
when
easy.
you said graphical links, I was f***ing myself.
I think you're the only person who got that.
Oh my god!
Do you guys have links installed still?
Does it come?
do
I don't know.
I?
Let me see.
No, it doesn't, because I always build it and install it, and I'm pissed when it doesn't come. And
Yeah, I
like now,
definitely do not.
and, like you build it yourself and it doesn't come with SSL support, and it annoys me. Oh, and that was the other thing. wget now is cranky about SSL certificates, and you have to pass the like no certificate check
Oh, yeah.
option.
Well, that doesn't
for
come.
half the
That
sites.
doesn't come built anymore either.
I know. It's one of the things. It's like Solver. Like when you get a new Mac, I install Quicksilver, Solver, like all the apps I need, BB Edit, and I also go and install wget and links because I'm old. No, but seriously, who likes curl? Like you have to pass the capital O option to do the one thing that's the common case. Like what good? Oh, the curl's defaults is just spew it into standard out. That's talk about an app with terrible defaults. That's why I installed wget. I should just alias wget to curl minus capital O. But ugh. Yeah, we have a show about text editors where like everyone is like stuck with, like Marco's stuck with TextMate because it's just what he got used to, right? And you can like never leave it, so he'll be like 70 years old still using TextMate 2, and everyone else is using their
It'll still be an alpha.
the neural interfaces or whatever. Well, it's the same thing with like Unix shells, where like I know so many people, myself included, where whatever Unix shell they like learned when they first learned Unix, they'd never leave it, and they just carry it around with them forever. I live in fear of the day that like Mac OS X is not going to come with TCSH, which is my login shell, because that's what the login shell was at BU in 1993.
Well, it's one of those things. Like it's like once you learn one, there's not really enough benefit to learn any other ones to make it worth the learning curve. Like you just the one you use keeps working.
Yeah, you just carry your dot files.
They
around
all
with you
have
forever.
very similar abilities. So it's not like there's like a massive reason to switch.
Well, unless you use Bash, which sucks. But Yeah, I think of changing to like ZSH or one of the like the super fancy modern like the equivalent of hipster shells. Not really, because hipsters didn't exist when ZSH was made. But like they do have lots of really amazing features. But then I just think about the amount of time I would have to spend to recreate my preferred key bindings and environment and all that other stuff. And I say, you know what? Just keep going with TCSH. But like for the past 7, 8 years, maybe 10 years at work, I'm always the only guy who doesn't use Bash, because like all the people who grew up in the Linux generation, like Bash was the default, and they all just use Bash. And so people they see my shell prompt and it's not a Bash shell prompt, and they just say just type export whatever equals, and I type something different. Like, that's not going to work. What are you doing? What is this? What are you typing into? Yeah, there's more to
That
life
must
than
be
Bash.
hard for you.
It is, because like my entire office, like for test plans or for putting instructions up or whatever, I have to translate everything into Bash ease, because I can't. Because for the people who don't really know Unix, I can't just tell them what to do. I have to type out the exact commands, and then I have to like start a little Bash cell in one of my windows so I can just make sure I'm not making typos and stuff like that. So it's like I'm speaking a foreign language in the midst of all these other people.
You could just convert to Bash.
No, why would I ever do that? It's terrible. The only reason to use Bash is if you were doing shell programming, because no one should ever do any shell programming in CSH or TCSH. But why would I ever do shell programming? We already went over that at the beginning of the show.
Is it bad? I probably shouldn't say this when we're still live, but is it bad that I'm almost enjoying this part of the show more than the actual show?
Oh, this is all going in.
Oh my god, I hope so. Oh, this is fantastic.
I think this would have been a good topic for an actual show instead of just me yelling about things.
No,
That
it's
is the
much better
show.
you just yelling about things. That's the best part.